In this episode, we take a hands-on approach to learning Chef with Chef's own Nathen Harvey. How do you track errors in development, and how do you know when your users run into errors? Do you even have an error tracking strategy? Mine was terrible, but I found a solution that I really like. Rollbar is an incredible product, and I'm not just saying that because they're sponsoring the show. I'm actually using Rollbar at Scale Your Code. I'll tell you more about that later in this episode, but go to try.rollbar.com/SYC and set it up with your app. It's really easy. It took me 5 minutes, and it works with any language and any tool you need. Try.rollbar.com/SYC. Hey fellow developers, my name is Christoph. I'm the host of Scale Your Code, Scale Your Show. If you're new here, then you may have missed Nathen's first episode back in May. In that episode, Nathen walked us through setting up a web server and proper testing methods, all using Chef and all on screen. This episode is going to build off of that, so if you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you're new to Chef, then I highly recommend that you pause this and go back to that first episode, or at least pull the code from GitHub, and I'll put some links all over the episode and the page as well, so that you can pull that down and easily find it. We're also going to run through a quick primer just to get you back to speed, maybe a 3-minute or 5-minute primer at the beginning of the episode as well. So also, if you listen to the episode, which I know a lot of people do, this may be a good episode to jump on video just so you can see what we're doing on screen, because it's going to be a lot of hands-on in this episode. Nathen, it's great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Christoph. It's great to be back.
So how you been?
I've been really well. How about yourself?
Good. All right, so in last episode, like I said, we set up a web server and we did a wget to the local host, and it just returned hello Chris. So that was great, right? But most developers probably don't want to be confined to localhost, right? They want to show off their project to the world. They want anybody to be able to access it, and they want to have a dynamic homepage. So what do you think, Nathen? How do you think we should go about doing this episode?
Yeah, here's what my plan is. I'd like to just kind of review what we set up last time, make sure that it's still running for us, and then let's put this web server out on the web. Let's deploy it to, I don't know, EC2 or something like that. How does that sound?
That sounds good. That sounds great.
Awesome. And of course, we'll do it all with Chef. So let me just start screen sharing here, and let me just sort of remind everyone where we left off. So as you know, we're working with Chef, and so this diagram sort of shows the full architecture of Chef. We've really just been working on our local workstation, which is down here towards the bottom of the diagram. And so let me open up the code that we've actually been looking at. So we wrote a little web server cookbook, and it has a default recipe. The default recipe does a couple of things. It includes a recipe from another cookbook, the apt cookbook. It includes its default recipe. And then it installs the Apache 2 package, and it writes out an index.html. So at the end of this, as you said, we should have a working web page that has something on the web page. We don't know yet in this recipe what that something will be, but if we look over here in the templates folder, we can see the index.html, and we expect it to say, hello, Chris. Of course, we also wrote some tests along the way. So we wrote some unit tests that say, that the Chef run should converge successfully, that the package Apache 2 should be installed. And then we actually wrote some integration tests that said, hey, if I run the command wget localhost, that should exit successfully. And we tested all of this locally, specifically the integration test, using a thing called Test Kitchen, which we configured over here in our kitchen.yaml. So remember, we're using Vagrant locally to spin up a VM. And when we use Test Kitchen, it's going to take our cookbook, put it onto that virtual machine, and then execute that cookbook. And then optionally, we can run our tests there. But you'll see that it's going to run this recipe in our run list called web server default, so the default recipe from the web server cookbook. Now, to validate that, we either have to run our tests, which tell us that everything's working, or we have to log into that machine. Well, it's a little bit janky to do that. Certainly if you're developing a web app, the thing that you want to do is just be able to open up that web application in your browser. So we can actually set up our our kitchen.yaml so that when Vagrant launches, it will actually do some port forwarding for us here. So you can see under driver, I've added a stanza for network, and then I'm passing in this array with two different options. First is this setting called forwarded port, and then it receives a hash. So I want to take guest port 80. So port 80 on the virtual machine, I want to forward that to port 8080 on my local machine. So at the end, in my own browser, right in Chrome, I should be able to just open up localhost colon 8080 and see what's actually running within that virtual machine.
Is it pretty similar if you have a Docker environment instead of Vagrant? Can you just switch out and do the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I were using, say, boot to Docker, I could switch out the driver here. Instead of using Vagrant, I could use Docker. Similarly, I could run my virtual machines for Test Kitchen off-board, if you will. So I could run them in EC2, I could run them in DigitalOcean, I could run them on Microsoft's Azure. So I have a bunch of different options, all based on the driver that the Test Kitchen gives us. So let's just move over to the code here. And again, I will push all of the code that I write today up to a Git repository.
Awesome.
So let me make sure first that I save this kitchen YAML.
And by the way, I said I'll link it up, but also it's at github.com/Nathen Harvey/scale_your_code. Just if you haven't seen the link already.
Yeah, that's it. So if I do, let's see. So I'm in my Chef repo here. So I want to move into the cookbooks, the web server cookbook. And then from here, I can run a kitchen list. And what we'll see is that my kitchen has not been created, but it lines up directly to the kitchen YAML that I was looking at. So it's the Ubuntu 12.04. It's going to run the default run list. Let me just kick that off. But what I want you to look at, Chris, while I kick this off is, the instance is default Ubuntu 12.04, the driver, and then we'll switch back to the test kitchen, or the kitchen YAML in just a second. Okay. So let me just run a kitchen converge. And now what kitchen converge will do is launch this virtual machine for us. And it's going to launch whatever instances I have specified. And my instances are based on the platform that I've specified, so Ubuntu 12.04. I could, of course, uncomment this, and then I would have two instances, an Ubuntu and a CentOS. And then also, it's based on the suite. So we saw it was Ubuntu 12.04 default. Well, the suite, we could have multiple suites. Each suite is going to have its own run list. So this says that we're going to launch an Ubuntu virtual machine in the default suite, which says run the default cookbook, or the default recipe from the web server cookbook. And then it's going to do that port forwarding for us. So this is just going to take a second, and what's happening here, or a minute or so, and what's happening here is it's spinning up a virtual machine for me. It's then going to take that virtual machine and install Chef on it, which is what has just completed, and then it's going to run through my recipe. So the first thing it's going to do is update the apt caches, which it just did as it's scrolling by on the screen there. And then it's going to go through and run my recipe, which says install Apache and write out the HTML file. And you can see here on the screen the change to that index.html file. It removed the it works, this is the default web page, and it put in its place hello Chris. So I should now be able to just open HTTP localhost. What port did I say? 8080? 8080. And what that will do is just pop open a browser for me. Of course, I could have come to the browser and just opened up this page instead of typing in open command line, whatever you like. I find obviously as developers I like to spend my time at the command line, so This is cool. So now we can see it says hello Chris. So I'm pretty confident that this thing is working. I can run kitchen verify just to run my integration tests, but I've already kind of tested this out. I know that this thing is working. It clearly installed the package for me. It clearly set up the homepage. So I think I'm ready to open this up to the world. Let's launch this on EC2. And so let me just walk through exactly how that would work. And the first thing I want to do, sort of while this kitchen, well, there we go. The kitchen verify is completed. So my tests, my integration tests are working really well. It's displaying the homepage, right? Before I do anything else, though, I think the thing I really should do is commit the change that I made. So I'm going to do a git commit -am and say that I set up port forwarding.
And that test that passed, that's in the test folder, right? Test, integration, default.
That's exactly right. Set up port forwarding for the VM. That's what I just did. And I'll just go ahead and push that right now. So if you're watching live, I think you're the only one watching live, Chris.
Yeah.
But if you check on the GitHub repository there, you'll see that it's been pushed already. So let's see. What I'm going to do here is let's just switch back over to this diagram here. So I've got everything working on my workstation. What I really want to do next is launch a node off in the cloud, and I want to turn this cloud node into my web server. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to use EC2 as a place to spin this up. But before I can do that, the thing that I'm going to do is set up a Chef server. And so we'll take the cookbook that we've just written here, we're going to publish it up to the Chef server, and then we're going to launch a node on EC2, have it check in with the Chef server to pull down its policy, which will be our cookbook, and then apply that policy here. So at the end, we'll have a Chef server that knows information about my node. We'll have a web page that I can go to online that's in a node running on EC2. Mm-hmm. So what we don't really have time to do is set up a Chef server, and frankly, when you're first learning Chef, learning how to set up a Chef server isn't really exciting. What you're really excited about learning is how to write the cookbooks. And so the way that I love to sort of take people through this process is to start with a service that Chef offers called Hosted Chef. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go over here to the Chef homepage. That's at www.chef.io. And from here, I'll just click Get Chef, because that's what I want to do. I want to get me some Chef. And here you see a bunch of different options here. So I could run my own Chef server, which I could download and run in my own infrastructure. I could run it or launch an image from both AWS Marketplace or from the Azure Marketplace.
When does it make sense to do that?
Yeah, so it really makes sense to do that depending on your needs. So Hosted Chef, the nice thing about Hosted Chef is that we, Chef Software, manage that server for you. So it's really like software as a service. Now, sometimes that just doesn't work with what you want to do. And it might not work with what you want to do because maybe you have your own data center and you have some compliance constraints that say you can't run anything off, software as a service. You need to keep everything in-house. Maybe that's just the way you prefer to run things, is that everything is within your own control, within your own data center, in which case you should just download the Chef server. Now, if you're running on AWS or on Azure, you might want to just spin up your own Chef server that's in your VPC, like if you're on Amazon or within your availability zone or something like that that's close to you. The nice thing about grabbing your own Chef server is you actually will have access to all of the premium features that are available with Chef. So you could purchase those premium features on a subscription basis if you like. Some of those include things like analytics that can give you much better insight into everything that's happening across your infrastructure. Sure. But what we'll use today is Hosted Chef. I like Hosted Chef, number one, because it's super easy to get started with. So it makes for a great learning opportunity or a great learning environment. The other thing that's really nice about Hosted Chef, though, is that if I'm using Hosted Chef, I don't need to be concerned with keeping my Chef infrastructure, my Chef server infrastructure up and running. Like it's another server for me to manage if I'm running my own Chef server. By using Hosted Chef, I sort of eliminate the need for me to manage that myself. Mm-hmm.
Plus, it's free up to a certain amount of nodes, I believe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when we sign up for Chef Server, what you'll see here is the thing I'm not going to do is give a credit card. Because it's completely free. You can use Hosted Chef for free to manage up to 5 nodes. So as we're going through this, we're going to launch at most 2 web servers. So clearly we'll be well within the bounds of the free service. So signing up is pretty easy. I'm just going to type. I'm going to stop talking for a minute because when I talk and type at the same time, it gets pretty messy.
Okay.
Scale your code. Yeah. I'm just going to, give it some stuff. I need to, of course, make sure that like username and email are unique. Now, of course, Chris, now's a good time for us to pause and read the terms of service and master license and service.
Sure. You gonna do that for us?
We'll edit that out, and I'll just check the checkbox. Is that cool with you?
Sure, that's fine. It's edited.
We're going to go ahead here and get started. And this is just going to take a second while it spins up a new Chef organization for me or a Chef user for me on Hosted Chef. And from here, it's going to ask me to create a new organization. I'll go ahead and do that. and I'm just going to give it the same short and long name. But an organization, basically, the way that Hosted Chef works, it's essentially a multi-tenant environment, which is to say that I can have an account and an organization on Hosted Chef, and you can have one on Hosted Chef, and we can't see each other's data, which is exactly what you want. Mm-hmm. Of course, I could, in a similar fashion to GitHub, where I could invite you to collaborate on my repository on GitHub, I could also invite you into my organization on Hosted Chef, and then we can collaborate on infrastructure. But once I've logged in, I'm going to download a starter kit and just proceed. That's going to drop a file here, chef-starter.zip, into my downloads directory. And now I'm going to come back over here to my command line. So I'm going to move over to my downloads directory where that starter file was just downloaded. I'm going to unzip the chef-starter.zip. And then I'm actually going to go back to where I was before. And so now I'm in my temp directory and the Scale Your Code directory, Chef Repo. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move a directory that's now in downloads, Chef Repo. And it's a directory called .chef. And I'm going to move that directory to my current directory. And if we ls.chef, you'll see that there are a couple of things that were created there. One thing that's in that directory is a file called knife.rb. And then there are a couple of PEM files. These PEM files allow me to authenticate to that Hosted Chef server that I just signed up for. And then if I look at the knife.rb, you'll see that it has things like the API or the chef server URL. So which chef server am I going to talk to? So Knife is a command line tool that we use when we interact with Chef. So if I look over here at my Hosted Chef, if I look here at nodes, you'll see that I have no nodes. So I'm not managing any servers yet on Hosted Chef. Similarly, from my command line, I can run knife node list, and this will connect to my Chef server, see what nodes are available, and then it will list them all out for me here on the command.
I see. Okay.
So this knife node list, we see that it works without error. It doesn't display any nodes, which is what we expect. There are no nodes yet that we've configured. But running this command also validates that my knife tool is now configured properly to talk to my Chef server. So let me go ahead and git add.chef, and then git commit that, configure knife.
Oh, I think you forgot M.
Yep, I did. I forgot the -M. Thanks, Chris. There we go. And then I'll do a git push just to push that up there. Okay, so I now have, if we go back and look at our diagram, I now have my workstation. My workstation is configured to talk to my Chef server. So the next thing we want to do is launch a node over on Amazon's EC2. Now, in order to do that properly, one of the things that I'm going to have to do is make a little change to my knife.rb, my knife configuration file. So let me just go ahead and make that change really quickly. And in order for Knife to talk to Amazon, it needs to have the credentials that Amazon requires. So I'm actually pulling those credentials out of some local environment variables that I have set up. Now, for reasons that are hopefully self-explanatory, I'm not going to show you in this video my AWS key parenting, AWS access key, sorry, and my AWS secret access key. I'm not going to give away the keys to my AWS kingdom.
All right.
Sorry. But this configuration will allow me now to interact with EC2. And so there's a command, there's another plugin. If I do a chef gem list knife EC2, we'll see that I have this knife EC2 gem installed. And so knife is built in such a way that you can have plugins that can interact and provide other functionality to the base knife install. So I'm going to kick off a command over here. Let me just...
Did that gem come with the what you downloaded just a second ago?
It came with... It didn't come with what I downloaded just a second ago, but it did come with the Chef development kit.
Oh, okay.
Remember, we looked at that last time when we ran Chef version locally. It showed us that we were using the Chef development kit. I think it was May when we last recorded. So we were version 0.5.0 in that recording. I've since upgraded to the latest version of the Chef development kit, which you can get right off of the Chef homepage when you go to downloads or when you go to Get Chef. But in any case, when I installed that, it included the Knife EC2 gem. Now, I'm just going to run a command here, and what I'm going to do is walk you through what this command says. And so in order to kind of walk you through what it says, I'm just going to create a new file over here just so that we can look at this particular command. So here's what we said on the command line. Knife EC2 server create. I want to give it an image. So with Amazon, you always, when you launch an instance on Amazon, you always give it a base AMI or an Amazon machine image. Now this AMI is just a generic Ubuntu 12.04 server that you can get out of the AWS marketplace. And so this is going to spawn a new instance. It's going to use my credentials and go to the AWS API and say, give me a new machine. I want this image. I'm going to skip this one for a second and look at the flavor next. So what size of that image do I want? I want an M1 small. And I want you to put it in this security group. So this is a security group that I've already set up that basically allows us to access this node via SSH and over port 80 so that we can see the web browser, right? Mm-hmm. And then I also need to tell it, so what this is going to do, Knife EC2, the first thing it's going to do is go off to Amazon's API and say, hey, give me this instance. And if we check back in over here on the command line, you can see that that's exactly what happened. So it spawned a new instance. Here was the instance ID for me, IF133505A. It put it into the availability zone and the security group that I asked for. And then it just kind of paused and waited for that instance to come up. Once that instance came up, it waited for SSH to be available. And then it actually SSH'd into the machine. And it knew how to SSH into the machine because we told it which SSH user to use. So it's going to use the username Ubuntu. And I have my SSH key configured so that my SSH client is going to automatically pass my Amazon credential so that I can log into that box. And so it's going to SSH into that machine. And then the first thing that it's going to do, you can see here, is it's installing Chef. So it's going to install the Chef client on that node that was just spawned. And then after that's done, it's going to configure Chef and then run Chef. But we ran into an error. Uh-oh, we have a little problem here. So look, it tells us that there's an error resolving cookbooks for our run list. So we told our web server to use the run list recipe web server, which will use the default web server recipe. The problem is, if we think back or look back again at our diagram, what's happened is our local workstation spawned a node here on EC2, and now it's going to the Chef server and saying, hey, I should be a web server. What's the cookbook look like? And the Chef server says, oh, I don't know anything about cookbooks yet, because we haven't uploaded our cookbook yet. So let's go ahead and upload that cookbook, and then we can run that process again. Okay. So let's go over here into cookbooks. If you'll remember, we, in our metadata, let me move into the web server cookbook, and then from here, let me just open up the metadata file. One of the things that we said is that this cookbook depends on the apt cookbook. And remember, our recipe said include recipe apt default, and that was the recipe that got the apt cache refreshed for us. So in order to do that, we have this dependency, which really means we need to add two cookbooks to our Chef server, the apt cookbook and our own web server cookbook. Well, within Chef, there's a tool called Burkshelf that, again, comes with the Chef development kit that's going to make it easy for us to do this. So one of the things that exists here is a Burks file, and that says use the supermarket.chef.io as the source for your cookbooks, and inspect the cookbook's metadata to find out what dependencies this cookbook has. So in other words, when I run this command here, Burks install, it's going to look at my local metadata file to find any cookbooks that are dependent, and then it will download the apt cookbook, which is a dependent cookbook, and it will store that locally. And then it will also use my current my current cookbook, which is the web server cookbook. So now I have those cookbooks locally on my machine, but I need to put them onto the chef server. So I'll do that using Burke's upload.
Okay. And that's going to send it to the chef server.
And this is going to take these two cookbooks, my web server cookbook and my apt cookbook, and it's going to publish them up to my chef server. So you can see here that they were uploaded to api.opscode.com, organizations, and Harvey SYC for Scale Your Code. And so now if we go back up a couple of directories here into my chef repo, I can run this command knife cookbook list, and this will show me that I have two cookbooks available on my chef server, the apt cookbook and the web server cookbook. Similarly, if I come over here to the hosted chef user interface, if I look at policy, I'll see that there are two cookbooks. Here's the apt cookbook, and here's the web server cookbook that we just created. And in fact, right here within the web UI, I can actually browse the contents of each one of my cookbooks. So here's the README for the apt cookbook. If you look at the content, you can see, as an example, that there's a default recipe, and we can open that up and see just what does the default recipe do here. So I can browse all of this code right within the chef server user interface. All right, so now that I have those cookbooks published up there, let me go ahead and rerun that knife EC2 command. And so again, this is going to go to Amazon's API, spawn an instance, wait for that instance to come up. Of course, this is going to be a new instance. And once it comes up, it's going to install Chef, configure Chef, and then run Chef. So when this is done, what should happen is we should see Hello Chris available at that web page.
Did you destroy the other instance? Did I miss that, or does it automatically destroy it?
No, I left it running.
Okay.
I will go in and destroy it sort of as we clean up after today's episode.
Okay, and also I see you're doing M1 small. I just looked up the requirements, and the Chef client only needs about 512 megabytes. So if anybody wants to go cheaper with T2 Micro, you shouldn't have any problems with that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. When I teach classes, I usually do it on the smallest instance I can get. Yep.
I know it comes with a free tier too, so that's, if people still have the free tier, that's really, they could do this entire thing for free.
Exactly right. So while this is running, Chris, did you have questions that I can answer for you while we wait for this?
Actually, Nathan, while that's running, I want to share something with the audience. I take sponsorship at Scale Your Code super seriously. If it's not a product or a company that I think can really benefit the audience, then I don't think they're a good fit for the show. That's why Rollbar is such a great fit. If you're a developer that touches any code, whether it's in production or development, and you're not using some kind of error tracking solution like Rollbar, for example, go to try.rollbar.com/SYC and stop wasting hours of debugging. Get better visibility, see things breaking when your users run into errors, and get notifications so you can have somebody on your team or yourself fix it and push it live before more users run into problems. Or just in debugging phases of the development process, right? You're working on a feature, you've got problems, you want to see what's going on behind the scenes, go to try.rollbar.com/SYC. I really think you're going to like it. Back to you, Nathan. Are you creating a new one, or?
Yeah, so I actually ran into a little issue there, so I just spawned another one. I'll explain the issue in a moment. Once this one comes up, I'll tell you exactly what the issue was.
Okay, I missed it.
Yep.
Do you have a dual screen, by the way? Can you hear me, Nathan?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I clicked on a mute thing.
Oh, no worries.
Yes, I do indeed have a dual screen. I find it's absolutely necessary.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've seen you look back and forth and pull some things on the screen.
Yeah,
I do too, and it's I didn't used to have one, but man, it helps so much when you're doing stuff like this.
Absolutely.
And you've gotten quite good at showing stuff on the screen as well. I know you go to a lot of conferences, so you're probably used to it by now, but when I do some recordings, sometimes I have a few series or just tutorials where I try to walk people through stuff. I always forget something, or I always mess something up, or I forget I changed a configuration file, so I'm talking about something and then I realize I have it wrong, or whatever it is. So I'm really impressed by how you're able to do it so quickly and without, or with very few mess ups, if any. It's impressive.
Yeah, it's there's always errors, and for me, the errors are actually good because it number one, it shows that we're doing this live, Chris. This isn't, this isn't some canned demo. This isn't Maple.
No, this is not scripted.
This is a real thing. But also, it's you can learn a lot from the errors. For example, we learned that if we forget to upload our cookbook, then it's not going to work when we try to execute that cookbook on our node. And had we remembered to do that, it would be easier to forget it later, right? And so while this is running, and you can see here that it's now running the Chef client, you can see it's doing like the apt-get update and the apt-get auto-clean and things like that. So it's about to install our web server. But the thing that happened was the first one that I launched, when it failed, it did create a client on the Chef server. And so when I tried to create another client using the same name, it complained about that. It said, no, I already have a key for this client, and you're not the same client. So it's just enforcing the authorization and authentication on the Chef server. So I came in again saying, hey, I'm Production Web, and it said, no, you're not. I already know Production Web, and you don't have the appropriate credentials to get there. So I launched it again, and I just called it Production Web 1. Okay, so this is now completed, and we see it's going to give us all kinds of details back. So again, it's going to tell us this is the instance ID and the image ID that we were built from and so forth. Here's the name, and then also it's going to show us, where it showed us as part of the output here, the URL. So if I come over here to a browser and go to that page, sure enough, we see Hello Chris.
Awesome.
Now, let's just take a quick look at what's happened here on the hosted Chef server as well. If we look at the web user interface here on hosted Chef, we'll see that I now have, I have the old node that didn't actually check in, like that one failed, Production Web. And now I have this new node, Production Web 1. And we can see directly on the Chef server a lot of information about this node. So we can see that it last checked in about 2 minutes ago. It's been up, like its uptime is about 2 minutes. We can see its run list down here. It shows that it's using the web server cookbook, so it's using the default recipe from there. We can also see some attributes about this node. So as an example, we can see the memory that's available on this particular machine. You can see how many CPUs are available and what is that, there's one CPU, what does it actually look like? All of this data is available to me directly within this web user interface. Now all of this data comes from a tool called Ohi. And so Ohi is a system profiler that gets executed on your nodes so that your recipes can make decisions about information that maybe appear or maybe are driven by information about your system. For example, if you know that this system has 8 gigabytes of memory, maybe I want to assign a portion of that memory to a particular process. Well, what portion of that memory do you want to assign? Maybe it's 25% of that memory. And if you say, I want to assign 25% of my memory to process X, it doesn't matter how much memory is on that box. You can run the same recipe on all of your infrastructure and get the same intended result. So you can make decisions, logic decisions or policy decisions based on the things within this.
Now, by default, Amazon Web Services, the default security group is to block all ports, right? So when you booted it up, that's when you had that security group you passed in the command?
Exactly. Okay. So when I ran that command, I passed a dash, I think it was dash security group. Sorry, it was dash security group ID.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yep. And so here I just specify that, as it mentions, the security group IDs that I want. And so you could have a comma separated list. If I had another security group, I could, do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or whatever here and just add that. And now that server would have those security groups associated with it.
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't be able to pull up the page. So if anybody runs into that problem, that's probably the reason why.
Exactly. It's probably because your security group is blocking port 80. Either that or you may have IP tables or something running also that is blocking port 80. So it can be a fun thing to troubleshoot for sure.
I know there's also a firewall, what do you call it, cookbook or recipe?
Yes. Yep. That you can grab from the supermarket. Yep.
Yeah, and it opens up those different ports.
All right, so let's just look at, first, let's make sure that I've committed everything that I've changed off to my source code repository. So I've just added in my knife credentials, or my Amazon credentials here. So let me just do a commit. All right, now I'm nice and clean. I'll just push all of that stuff up. Now, it's interesting that we can look at, server details within the web user interface. Another really cool thing about Knife is I have access to all of those same details from the command line. So for example, if I do a Knife node show, what was my node name? Let me remember. I think I called it production
web 1.
Web 1. If I do a knife node show production web 1, that will show me, hey, here's the node name, here's its internal IP address, the external IP address, its run list, what recipes were applied, so the web server default and the apt default recipe were applied. What platform is it? So this is Ubuntu 12.04. I can also, we saw lots more detail in the web user interface. I can do the same thing, and if I pass as an argument to this command -L for show me a long listing of this, it will show me all of those attributes that we saw within the web UI. So I can look at things like memory, the CPU. I can get all of this great data. So I could also look at just a specific part of that data. So let me just look at the EC2 related data. I'll do that by passing a -A for one attribute. And EC2 is a key, and then it has a bunch of subkeys like the instance ID, the instance type. All that information is there available to me. Now this is really great because I can do things like I can write some scripts or something that can utilize this data, maybe build some reports, something like that, which is really, really handy. Another thing that I can do, though, is I can, from the command line, I can actually use that same search or those attributes to actually search for things. So I can do a knife search node, and then I can specify some criteria. And the way that I'll specify some criteria is I can mention a key and then a value. So let me just say the name is like web. So this is going to search for all nodes on my Chef server that are registered with my Chef server where their name is like web. And when I run this, you can see that it found two items. It found the production web that we tried and failed earlier, and you can see it's failed because it has no run list. And then we also got the production web 1, which is the one that we're actually using. So this is really interesting because now I can do things here like search, and let me maybe look at the platform. Why don't you tell me the platforms that are available in my production infrastructure? So I'm currently running, we know that production web 1 is Ubuntu. Production web failed, so we don't have the data about it. But let's assume maybe that's a Windows box. So I can very easily ask the Chef server, what operating systems am I running in production?
Right.
Or what operating system versions am I running in production? And that can really give me a lot of insight into my infrastructure as well.
Where can we find all these knife commands?
So you can find them all on the docs page. So at docs.chef.io, you can find all of the information about Knife.
Okay, great.
And then let me show you one other thing that I think is really super cool. So you can use this this idea of search to actually execute remote commands on the infrastructure within your or on the nodes within your infrastructure. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to know the uptime of all of my servers that are running Ubuntu. So how long have they been up, right? I can run this command, knife ssh, and then I can specify a query criteria. So platform is Ubuntu. And then I can specify a command that I'd like to run, uptime. And what this is going to do, it's going to, from my workstation, let me just sort of hover over some things back here on this diagram. From my workstation, we're going to query the Chef server and say, hey, find all of the nodes that are have a platform of Ubuntu and give me a list of those. Once you've returned a list of those, from my workstation, I'm going to make a parallel SSH connection to all of those nodes and then run a command. So, of course, we only have one node
Mhm.
where the platform is Ubuntu. But if we run this command uptime, it's going to first search the chef server to say, find me all of the nodes that meet this criteria. So it found one node. And then from here, I'm going to SSH into that node and run this uptime command.
Okay, I see.
And so if there were multiple nodes that were returned, for example, if we had a production web 2 and we ran this same thing, we would see both of those come back in my results. And I would have executed those commands over there.
That makes it so much easier.
Yes. So now I have full control where I can do remote execution across the nodes within my infrastructure. But then also I can change things about the way my node actually works. So why don't we make a quick change to our policy and see how do we change the way our node is configured and get that onto the updated node. You think we have time to back this?
Yeah, no problem. Definitely.
Great. So let's come back over here to our cookbook. And actually, let's just look at this default index page. Like, it's cool, it says hello Chris, but we have all this data that we got from Ojai. Maybe we want to display some of that data on the web page. Now, of course, this is kind of a simple example. You might not actually want to display data on a web page like this, like what we're going to do, but you might use this data in configuration files that you set up on your server. So let's say we want to grab the node's internal IP address. So if I come back over here and do a knife node show production web 1, and let me just look at some of the EC2 attributes about that thing.
Oh, there's no dash after web. Sorry, I should have caught that.
There we go. Much, much better. So let's say I want to pull the EC2. Why don't we pull the AMI ID? What I can do here, this is an ERB file. So I'll just type and then I'll tell you what I did here afterwards. So EC2, and let's grab the AMI ID.
So node is to access those. Anytime you want to access anything like that, you use node prefix before it.
Exactly. So what these will be, those attributes are available in what we call the node object. So that we're writing, code. So we have an object in memory, and each one of those things is available as keys or keys and like key values on that node object. So the node object really is it's kind of like a hash. It's not actually a hash, but it's kind of like a hash.
Okay.
Sometimes think of it like that. So when we say we want EC2 AMI ID, what's going to happen is this is going to be replaced at runtime with this value. And so we'll grab that, and let's grab, I don't know, maybe something else. Let's grab the local host name. Two things is probably good enough just for the demonstration purposes, right? So we'll say, hello, Chris. Here's the AMI ID, and here's the local host name. Now, we've made a change to our cookbook. So the thing that we should do now, just so that we're very safe, is we should update the version number for this cookbook. So I'm going to change the version number because if someone is currently using version 0.1.0 of this cookbook, we just changed its behavior. So we want them to continue to get the same behavior if they're using that version.
Okay.
So I'm just going to bump this to version 0.1.1. And then the thing that I should really do before I actually publish this cookbook is I should go into Cookbooks web server and I should run a kitchen test. And what kitchen test is going to do is it's first going to take any instances that I have of this virtual machine running and it's going to destroy them. So you can see here it's destroying that VM and shutting it down. The next thing it's going to do is launch a new instance of that VM and then run my cookbook on it and then also run the verification tests. So as long as we didn't break anything with our new policy, what we expect to have happen is that the homepage is going to be served locally. What I'm going to do is I'll let that run, and I'm just going to spawn a new window over here while that's running.
Okay.
so that we can see like what else would we do here. So
okay, so here's the workflow. I just want to make sure I have it right. You make a change locally. You change your code locally. Then you kitchen test it.
Yes.
Then you put it on your Chef server.
Yes.
And then you deploy it to your nodes.
Right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So back over here in this window, we're testing it locally. We're gonna assume that it works, right? Mm-hmm. So let's move into the Chef Repo Cookbooks web server. We have git status here, shows us that we have some changes. So really the thing that we should do is git commit.
Looks like there are some errors in the background.
Yeah, it does look like errors.
Lots of red.
Let's see what's going on over there. Let's see. So this is interesting. Because we're running it in Test Kitchen, we're assuming EC2 is available, but our Test Kitchen isn't actually EC2. So we could easily fix this, though. Let me just go over here to my kitchen YAML. We can set up an attribute here called EC2, and then from there we can set up attributes like what did we have? AMI ID equals foo, and local host name equals bar. And now let's try that, and we'll run that in the background. I think I have the syntax correct on that kitchen YAML, but if not, I'll make sure that I push the right syntax up to GitHub.
See, this is why this is so great. You get to see how somebody debugs it.
Exactly. It's better when things fail, right?
Yeah.
All right, so let me just run a quick git status here. We'll see that I'm no longer clean, so git commit add attributes to the Test Kitchen. That should make those attributes available for me. But now what I'm ready to do is that Burks process. So if I do a Burks install, it looks like it failed. I think the problem is I just have my my syntax wrong here on the Test Kitchen. I'll fix that after we're done recording and make sure that I push a good version of that Test Kitchen file up there. So I do a Burks install just to tell Burks, hey, I have a new version of the web server cookbook, and then I can run a Burks upload to push that new version back up to the Chef server. And you'll see some interesting things here. First, we're still using apt 2.8.1. It's going to skip uploading that, and then it's going to upload version 0.1.1 of our web server cookbook. So now if I do a knife cookbook list, it will show me again that I have the apt cookbook and the web server cookbook. The web server cookbook, it shows the latest version is 0.1.1. But if I do a knife cookbook show web server, what we'll see is that I have actually both versions of that web server are now stored on the Chef server, both the 0.1.0 and the 0.1.1.
That way you can test the new version and see if it really works in production or not before switching all the other ones to it as well.
That's exactly nice. Right. That's exactly right. But we're going to, again, assume that it's working properly for us. And what I'll do, I now need to run, the way that I apply that change over here on the node is I rerun the Chef client. So when I run the Chef client, what it does is it checks in with the Chef server and says, hey, here I am, what's my policy? And the Chef server will send down any updated policies. So in our case, the updated cookbook for the web server, and then it will apply that updated policy here. And we should be able to see that stuff showing up over here. Mm-hmm. So the best way to run Chef Client for now is to SSH back into that box. But of course, I don't actually want to SSH back into that box. I'll just run the knife SSH command and go anywhere where the platform is Ubuntu, run the command sudo chef client. And so again, this, from my local workstation, I'm going to search the Chef server and say, hey, find me all the nodes where the platform equals Ubuntu. And it found just one. And then it says SSH into that node and run this command, sudo chef client. And we can see the output here. And of course, it did work because we are actually on EC2. And if I come over here to the web page, I can now see, hello, Chris. Here's the AMI ID, and here's my internal host name.
Awesome. And so we can also use those in the configuration if we need it for whatever reason. And would you put those in attributes directory maybe, and then access them through.
Yeah, so
the
these
recipes?
we don't need to put into an attributes directory because, as it turns out, Ojai just gives us these attributes.
Right,
But
that makes
something
sense.
that we could do, and I'll just show you that really quickly, like how would you use attributes yourself? You could do chef generate attribute. We want to generate it in the current cookbook, and we'll just call it default. And what this is going to do is generate a file for us. Over here I have this new file, attributes default. And from here I could set a default attribute. So default, the name of our cookbook is web server. So just by convention I'll give it a key of web server. And then maybe I'll set it to greeting. And instead of, what I'll set for the greeting, I'll set a value of scale your code. And then over on my index.html template, instead of saying hello to you, what I could do instead is say hello to whatever the nodes web server
Mm-hmm. And that way, instead of changing it in multiple different files, if you are using that attribute in multiple files, you can just change it in one central location, and that perpetuates, I can't even say that word, to the other files as well.
Exactly. So now I've changed this from a static greeting to pulling from an attribute. Let me update and bump my metadata again. I'll set that to version 1.2. And then I'll run that Burks dance here. I'm going to Burks install, and then I'm going to run Burks update.
I think you misspelled the first one.
I sure did, so it all totally failed.
Is there a way to automatically increment that version?
There is a way that we can automatically increment that version. I'll show you that in just a second.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Sure. So, and it's actually a good idea that once you've uploaded a cookbook to the chef server, the very next thing that it makes sense to do is actually bump the version so that the next time you try to upload it, you're not overwriting and you don't run into any issues. So Knife actually comes with a nut, and as part of the chef development kit, you have another tool called Knife Spork. And with Knife Spork, you can bump your cookbook. So let me, actually, I think I have to do this from the chef repo directory. So I could do Knife Spork bump web server. And just before we do anything else, I want to show you here that it says version 1.2 over here. I'm going to run that command. And what it will do is it says it successfully bumped it to 1.3. And sure enough, in my file back over here, it says
okay. Yeah, that's much better.
Yeah. And then, so the last thing I want to do before we end the demo, of course, is I want to run that Knife SSH command again, because I want to see that attribute that we just created. I want to see that get applied on the web server. So we'll run Knife SSH and run sudo chef client to apply this new policy.
Mm-hmm. And so this here is the web server cookbook. If you wanted to have everything on the same server, like the database, application, etc., then you would just keep making recipes inside that same cookbook. But if you want to separate them to different servers, then you make different cookbooks, right?
Oh, so typically what I would do if I wanted to create a database or manage a database, I would actually go ahead and create another cookbook that was for the database. Mm-hmm. Because remember, when we run the chef client, it always looks at its run list. So if we just, as an example, look over here at the run list that we have in our test kitchen, it says recipe web server default. Well, we could have actually multiple recipes in here. So I could have recipe database, and maybe I have a client recipe because the web server probably isn't running the database itself. Maybe that's off on another machine, but I want it to run the database client. Right, so that it can connect. So like the MySQL client needs to be installed there, something like that. So what I would do is actually break out the different components that I have into different cookbooks, because then those cookbooks can be utilized in multiple different locations. It's a good way to share that policy or that configuration.
Sure, okay. That makes sense.
Makes sense. All right, well, it looks like we're just about out of time. So what other questions can I answer for you, Chris, before we wrap up here?
Looking through my notes, and just want to make sure I didn't forget anything. So we talked about separating if you have a database, for example, and then there's a whole host of things to do with the database. For example, if you have MySQL and you need to have a password, username, etc., then you can use data bags. There's some really good tutorials, and I think we mentioned this or in the last episode back in May, where if you go on chef.io, actually, what is that URL? Is it learn.chef.io? Okay,
yes.
And then you scroll down. There's the Chef Basics. There's different tiers of tutorials. There's also one about your web application, which walks through MySQL and Apache, etc., and talking about data bags, encryption, and how you can store these passwords without having it in source control, without showing it to the public, and all that good stuff. So that's probably the next step, I would say, right?
Yeah, for sure. So what I would do from here is I would definitely go out to Learn Chef. I would run through all of the tutorials that we have here. And then really the most important thing, though, is to think about a problem that you want to solve. Mm-hmm. So what sort of infrastructure do you want to deploy? It's easy for us to sit here and create a little Apache Hello World app, mm-hmm. right? But probably that's not the challenge that you have. What is the thing that you're trying to automate? Make sure that you fully understand that. And then take sort of the foundational or fundamental knowledge that you now have of Chef and start to apply it to your own problems.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other tutorials like this? I'm trying to remember if we had talked about any other ones in the previous episode.
Yeah, the Learn Chef site is definitely the best place. It's the place that I recommend because we're constantly updating that. There are lots of great, hands-on tutorials here. Additionally, there's this new area called the Skills Library, where we talk about things like building your DevOps skills and doing some planning best practices. This is a whole tutorial on how to become a secure chef. If you like this video format, there's the Chef Fundamentals series, which was actually a 6-part series that I ran that kind of walks you through a lot of what we've talked about here. Mm-hmm. Again, those are hands-on demos are included with that. And so in that, you, as it shows here, you register with the Chef server, you end up creating a cookbook, spinning up an instance on EC2, all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And as we saw Nathen debugging some of the errors as it was live, you can go back in the stack trace and see what it's spitting out. What is it saying that's wrong with whatever code you have? So that's a good way of going about debugging. Well, Nathen, thanks a lot for sharing your time with us, and I'm impressed with how you do it with such ease. Really, it's a very hard skill. I mean, if anybody's ever tried to do recordings like this, they will appreciate how flawlessly you walk through it.
Oh well, thanks so much, Christoph.
Great job.
All right, it was great to see you, man.
Yep, great to see you too. Thanks again for having a sequel in here.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, take care.